As a constitutional law attorney, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Good evening. I'm Jenna Ellis, and as Joe Biden continues to deal with issues of his mental competency and refuses for the first time in presidential history a mental competency test, he's also dealing with the special counsel's report and now an issue that the House Judiciary Committee is subpoenaing from his ghostwriter. This is coming from The Hill. The headline says, House Judiciary requests information from Biden's ghostwriter. The House Judiciary Committee has asked the ghostwriter of President Biden's memoir to turn over any recordings and notes from his conversation with the president. The letter to Mark Zwanitzer, who helped Biden write Promise Me, Dad, and Promises to Keep, asks the ghostwriter to turn over audio recordings and transcripts he has of their conversations. The request comes after special counsel Robert Hur said Biden read aloud passages from notebooks he kept during his time in office, including on 3 occasions where Biden shared passages dealing with classified information with Zwanitzer. This quote coming from Chair Jim Jordan, who wrote in his letter this, quote, Special Counsel Hur's report unequivocally provides that during many of the interviews with his ghostwriter, Biden read from his notebooks nearly verbatim, sometimes for an hour or more at a time, and at least 3 times Biden read classified notes from national security meetings to you, the ghostwriter, nearly verbatim. Based on the information in Special Counsel Hur's report, President Biden's assertion that he never shared classified information with you appears to be false. Well, the ghostwriter is unfortunately unlikely to be able to comply with this request because apparently he deleted all of those audio recordings that the special counsel's team was able to go back and get from his tech. But this has caused some members of Congress, including on the House Judiciary, to raise the question, what is he hiding? Representative Dan Bishop said this last night with Greta Van Susteren.
Obviously, it's important to get a list of the information that, from the ghostwriter so you get a complete picture. But what struck me in the letter, first of all, in the letter from the chairman to the ghostwriter says, you took steps to conceal some of these recordings and transcripts. That sort of suggests something a little more sinister than just putting some documents aside. Do you know anything more about that?
Well, only what Robert Hur, the special counsel, reported or set forth in the report, Greta, that some of the recordings on his phone, I believe it was, or other devices had been deleted once he learned that a special counsel had been appointed to handle the matter. And that obviously begs questions about his credibility and whether he was fully cooperative. Certainly he seems to have provided transcripts and other material so that the special counsel could determine that indeed Vice President Biden, when he was vice president or subsequently, read substantial amounts verbatim to his ghostwriter. And then, of course, we have an impeachment inquiry before our committee, and what Chairman Jordan has done is recognize that President Biden called a press conference, went before the country, and guaranteed that he did not do what the special counsel said. So it places Mark Zwanitzer, the ghostwriter's information, testimony, documents, recordings, and so forth, directly an issue in the impeachment inquiry we have. So Chairman Jordan has issued a letter requiring his appearance to testify in a deposition or a transcribed interview and the production of all of the materials that are in question because they have a great bearing on our impeachment inquiry now that the president has gone before the nation to deny what the special counsel said he did.
So this is, in my opinion, the top story in the nation right now, that Joe Biden has been found by the special counsel's report to be basically mentally incompetent to stand trial. This is generally a finding that's reserved for an arbiter at the trial court level. And so, in my opinion, I'm wondering why the special counsel didn't just go ahead and indict him or charge him and then let that issue be determined at trial, because people under the law are generally presumed to be fit, even children. So when I was a prosecutor, for example, I remember having a 4-year-old that was called to testify in a certain case. And of course, the defense counsel suggested that a 4-year-old can't possibly testify to the truth of the matter. And so there was a hearing, and a judge had to determine, does a 4-year-old understand the difference between a truth and a lie? And maybe not on a level of some deep philosophical explanation and some deep metaphysical analysis, but even a child, even my nephews who are 3 and 5, understand when someone is lying to them versus when someone is telling the truth. So it's very easy to go into court and say, hey, I'm wearing blue right now. If I told you that I'm wearing pink, is that true or is it false? Even children know that. If Joe Biden can't even answer those questions when he has his finger on the nuclear trigger buttons, that should raise 25th Amendment questions, not just impeachment. Impeachment is a remedy that I think that the Republicans absolutely need to exercise, and they need to exercise it quickly. Why haven't they impeached Joe Biden? Why are they waiting so long once they've had the majority for a year? Now, impeachment does require high crimes and misdemeanors. It can't just be an allegation of mental incompetency. But at the same time, there needs to be questions to the cabinet under the 25th Amendment. Why aren't you exercising any of these provisions? And why is Joe Biden, on the one hand, allowed to skate from all of the judicial accountability under the auspices of being, this very well-meaning but old man who can't really remember stuff like the special counsel's report says. But then on the other hand, he's still in office. He's still allegedly running for president. And does anyone care that mental competency is a big deal here and that he's declining to say that he is actually fit through a cognitive test? The press secretary is laughing this off, suggesting that, she can't even keep up with him. But someone, I think it was Joe Concha, who actually posted on Twitter that Biden's calendar for last Tuesday literally mentioned lunch with the vice president, and then at like 2:45, a briefing that he had with the vice president also sitting there, probably taking notes, probably has to recall certain details of that meeting because Joe Biden can't remember. These things are very critical, especially for voters in the 2024 election. If Joe Biden ends up being on that ticket, I don't really think that he will. I think the Democrats are going to replace him with someone else. Don't voters have a right to know whether he's mentally competent? Now, there's no law currently in place, but isn't this what Congress is supposed to do with legislative oversight authority? Why has no member of Congress suggested that maybe we need to legislate around it? Maybe we need to get together and have 2/3 of the majority of both houses actually pass a constitutional amendment or amend the 25th Amendment so that Congress can take action. These are things that are necessary to national security interests. So we're going to talk about this more with my next guest coming up right after this. So what really are the options that America has when we look at the mental competencies, or maybe lack thereof, of Joe Biden? Joining me now is Ron Coleman, who is an attorney and the host of his podcast, Coleman Nation. And Ron, I really am frustrated with the GOP. They've impeached Mayorkas, but they now are continuing just this inquiry with Joe Biden. After the special counsel's report, how much more evidence do they really need before they push for at least a mental competency test or impeachment or something along congressional oversight lines?
Well, I don't see how impeachment is an option. Impeachment is the purpose of impeachment is to remove an office holder for high crimes and misdemeanors. It isn't a crime to be stupid or to be demented. In fact, it seems to be a job requirement for many positions in Washington. In terms of the inquiry, I think the only reason there's delay, well, look, I don't want to say the only reason there's delay. There's plenty of good reason for delay. There's also not such good reasons for delay. The good reason is that we're in uncharted territory here. The 25th Amendment was a very obvious response to the Kennedy assassination. As you will recall, not that you'll recall when it happened. I have an alibi for November 1963. But it was based on the idea that if Kennedy had survived the assassination attempt, it had been impaired because it had obviously blown his blown his head up. There should be a constitutional way to remove him from office. And also, I imagine lawmakers recalled what had happened with Woodrow Wilson, who had a stroke and whose wife pretty much was the president of the United States for a number of years. What Congress and what the states, when they ratified the 25th Amendment, didn't do was put any sort of procedure into place. I mean, there's a procedure for taking action, but there isn't really let's put it this way, the Constitution and the laws of the United States have always operated on a certain assumption. What was that assumption? That the people, that although there might be bad actors, that fundamentally the institutions and the people who are in positions of power in those institutions will act with a level of responsibility to something other than political or personal concerns. That there's no getting away from that, except that we've gotten away from it entirely. So the Republicans, I think, are trying to figure out what the political angle is here. Biden, I mean, what's extraordinary here is that anyone from the Justice Department weighed in on this the way they did. Unless you want to take the position, which in and of itself is not irrational, that this was the plan more or less all along, and that they had hoped to slot in Kamala Harris, and then probably realized just how cringe she would be as a candidate. I don't know what would have changed other than the obvious increase, or well, let's just say the obvious decrease in President Biden's capacity. But it wasn't so hot 2 years ago, you know.
These things, Ron, are going back even to. Yeah, I mean, some of these things are going back even, to well before he got elected. I mean, some of these things like the ghostwriter and some of the notes that now the House GOP Oversight Committee is and the Judiciary Committee are subpoenaing, I mean, go back well before the election. I mean, is this something that voters have a right to be aware of? And should Joe Biden take a competency test? I mean, he's the first president in U.S. history that's declined to do this.
So but there's no constitutional requirement that just as there's no requirement that and you know this very well from having been there at the time, there's no requirement in the law, much less in the Constitution, that a president submit a financial disclosure disclosure form, yes, but personal income taxes, that has always been something that is done for political reasons, but it was never required, and President Trump, I think, quite appropriately declined to release his. There is no requirement for a competency test. The next move is the vice president's, and she will do as she is told when she is told it. That is, just as that has historically been Joe Biden's role as president and as vice president. That's his vice president's role also. We're not there. If Harris doesn't make that move, and again, she's not going to make it unless she's told to make it by the Democratic leadership, the process stops dead. Now, in terms of what you just raised, in terms of actual high crimes and misdemeanors, it is problematic. In other words, the classified information. It is problematic that the Justice Department has declined to prosecute. I don't think it's constitutionally problematic. It's politically problematic. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that the Justice Department, that Congress has to defer to the Justice Department with respect to impeachment. Not only that, the Justice Department really issued an opinion saying, if it weren't for the fact that the old man has lost it, we would have to probably, they didn't go as far as to say this, but his conduct was unlawful. Since Comey,
and do you think, Ron, that it was not a good call on the special counsel's part to make the determination of mental competency as a matter of law and declining to prosecute? I mean, shouldn't they have charged him and then let a judge sort that out as to whether he should have stood trial?
Absolutely, and of course, if it had been Trump or any Republican, you'd have to be out of your mind to believe that they would have taken this approach. But that does still leave me with the question of how could it be worth it for them to have opined about his inability to defend himself?
Yeah, and we're going to have to leave it there, Ron. But these are all really important questions.